About the limb leads and the augmented leads. Now let's talk about the precordial leads, so what everyone probably has in their head. Where do these leads go and what do they measure? So this includes the V1 to V6. Now the limb leads 1, 2, 3 and the augmented leads AVL, AVR and AVF all measure the heart from a frontal plane, i.e. it's looking down at the heart from a bird's eye view. Now the precordial chest leads V1 all the way to V6 actually looks at the heart in a horizontal plane, as you can see in the image. Now, just to make this thing short and simple, leads V1 and V2 look mainly at the right ventricle, whereas V3 and V4 look mainly at the septum, and leads V5 and V6 look at the left ventricle. So I want you to guys always memorize this and remember this. So in a right ventricular lead, i.e. which leads look at the right ventricle, so I mentioned V1 and V2, you know the SA node starts so my mouse is pointing to the electrical impulse starts from the SA node into the AV node and down into the ventricular septum. So when it gets a ventricular septum, you know the V1 and V2 produces first upward R wave, and this R wave is because of a positive deflection. And then since the conductive nodes of the heart goes into the left ventricle mainly because of the increased muscle mass in the left ventricle, so in this box here in the bottom, you can pause the video and read it. Eventually it would cause a negative deflection, so it's leads V1 and V2, which mainly looks at the right ventricle. Initially there's an upward R wave and then a negative S wave. Likewise in leads V3, V5 and V6, which mainly looked at the left ventricle, initially there's an opposite. Since there was a positive deflection, a positive R wave in the V1 and V2, in V5 and V6 there's actually a negative Q wave, and then there's a positive R wave because of the increased muscle mass and left ventricular muscle mass, and as that depolarizes it causes a positive deflection. Eventually you would end up getting an image like this. So in V1 you would have an R wave and an S wave. So these are key important things to remember. It is not like the limb leads where you have a Q, R and S. In fact, you only have two in the chest leads, R and S in V1 and V2, and then you have Q and R in V5 and V6. So eventually you end up having an image like this on the bottom. So in V1 you can see here there's a R wave first, and then there's an S wave, and then T wave. So the QRS complex consists in V2 again of R wave and then a negative big S wave. In V3 and V4 they start to normalize out, so there is a R wave and then the S wave becomes smaller, and then the R wave becomes larger in V4 and S wave becomes smaller, and eventually in V5 you start to see a negative Q wave and then a positive R wave with no S wave, and V6 likewise. So let's look at the ECG on the screen. So in the screen we're only concentrating on this part, V1, V2, V3, V4 and V5. So I've highlighted in V1 you can see an R wave and an S wave, V2 R wave and an S wave, and when you come over to V5, which looked at the left ventricle, so we have a small Q wave, where my mouse is pointing to, and a big deflective R wave in the positive direction.